Hi, welcome to the channel. This week we're going to be talking about Dr. William Palmer of Rugeley, also known as the Rugeley Poisoner. Rugeley is a small town in Staffordshire, England. It has a history of farming and coal mining, and it was in Rugeley on the 6th of August 1824 that William Palmer was born in Station Road. Palmer was born to Joseph Palmer and Sarah Palmer and was one of 7 children. You'd got Joseph Palmer, George Palmer, Walter Palmer, Thomas Palmer, Mary Ann Palmer and Sarah Palmer. William was sent to Rugeley Grammar School, which was a school of good repute, where he quickly gained a reputation of being dishonest, often getting other pupils to write his exams for him, basically cheat. He would either threaten these children to help him or bribe them with money that he'd stolen from his own family. He would often steal money from his sister's or his mother's purse. In 1836, William's father died suddenly, leaving £75,000 in an unsigned will. The money was divided between the 6 children and William's mother, with all the children receiving approximately £7,000 each. Now in those days, £7,000 was a lot of money. After school, Palmer was sent to Liverpool, where he worked for a chemist called Evans & Co. in Lord Street, Liverpool. Now whilst working as an apprentice, William began to gamble and stole money in order to pay his gambling debts. He was witnessed stealing money from envelopes and as a result was sacked from the apprenticeship. Anxious to avoid scandal, William's mother agreed to replace the stolen money at the chemist's in Liverpool, and actually one of William's elder brothers took his place. At the age of 18, William decided to embark on a second apprenticeship in Great Haywood, which is a small village several miles from Rugeley itself. This would be a 5-year apprenticeship with Dr. Edward Tylecote. Also during this time his mother continued to pay off his gambling debts, including £5 he owed to a local farmer. Dr. Tylecote suggested that Palmer walk the wards of the Stafford infirmary. It was whilst William was at Stafford infirmary that he discovered the poisons that would eventually lead to his downfall. But after a few weeks it was decided to take him out of there and send him to London. St Bartholomew's Hospital to be exact. In order to qualify as a physician, William had to undergo special coaching from a Dr. Steddle, and a fee of £100 was promised to Dr. Steddle to coach William. However, this was not paid, and Dr. Steddle took William to court to obtain the fee. Palmer qualified as a physician in August 1846. Palmer returned to Staffordshire after London, where he met his first probable victim. This was a gentleman by the name of George Abley, who was a plumber and a glazier. They met at a public house called the Lamb and Flag in Little Haywood, where Palmer challenged Abley to a drinking contest. So the drinking contest ensued, and an hour later Abley was carried home, where later that night he died. Although Abley's death wasn't proved to be caused by Palmer, locals noted that Palmer was attracted to Abley's wife. What do you think of that? Stretching it a bit in court, I think. With his new qualification to practice, Palmer returned to his hometown of Rugeley. On October the 7th, 1847, Palmer married an Ann THornton in St Nicholas's Church in Abbots Bromley, which is a small village around 6 miles from Rugeley itself. Now Ann THornton's mother was also called Ann THornton, and she inherited a fortune of £8,000. Now, the elder Ann THornton went to stay with Palmer, and 2 weeks after she stayed with Palmer, on the 18th of January 1849, the elder Ann THornton died. Now, Palmer did owe money to his mother-in-law, and he was very disappointed upon her death at the amount that his wife gained after her mother's death. Dr. Palmer bought a house in Market Street where he set up his practice, and this is what the house looked like back then. And this is the house as it is today. You'll notice that there's a new frontage being put on the house now. Looks completely different, and at the time of recording it's now a cafe. So now we've got George Abley, who died after associating with Palmer. His mother-in-law, the elder Ann THornton, had also died, who, don't forget, had inherited a large sum of money. It was around this time that Palmer's uncle, a Joseph Bentley, came to stay with Palmer, and they engaged in a drinking bout, soon after which Bentley became very ill, and 3 days later he also died. Now even the slowest of people began to think these people that are associating with Palmer are dying. In May 1850, Palmer developed an interest in horse racing and met a Leonard Blayden at the races, and Blayden lent Palmer £600. At these races, Blayden won lots of money. Now remember that point. Now on the 10th of May 1850, Blayden visited Palmer at his house in Rugeley to collect what was owed to him by Palmer. Not long after meeting with Palmer, Blayden became very ill. In an effort maybe to divert blame, Palmer asked a Dr Bamford to attend and also prescribe medication to him. However, Blayden died soon after and was buried in a hurry. When Blayden's wife came to see the body, she was surprised at how little money he had on his person. Remember, he had won lots of money at the races whilst in company with Palmer. And don't forget also that Palmer got away with paying Blayden what was owed. By this time, Palmer's addiction to horse racing was growing and growing. He owed lots of money to different people, and no matter what he seemed to do to raise money, he never had enough to pay off his debts. Some people to whom he owed money also began to die. One such person was a Mr Bly. Now Bly had met Palmer at the races, and he had won the sum of £800 from Palmer. Bly then complained of feeling unwell and was treated by Palmer, and you guessed it, Bly died soon after. But Bly had told his wife Palmer owed him this money, but when she approached Palmer about this, he said that Bly was deluded and it was actually Bly who owed Palmer the £800. Palmer and his wife Ann had a total of 5 children altogether, with their first, William Palmer, being born on the 11th of October 1848. Now William Palmer Jr. died in 1926. However, the other 4 children died in their early infancy. We have Elizabeth Palmer, aged just 10 weeks old, who was buried on the 8th of January 1851. Then we had Henry Palmer, who was just 1 month old. He was buried on the 8th of January 1852. Frank Palmer, also very young, was buried on the 21st of December 1852, and John Palmer, who was just 3 days old, was buried on January the 30th 1854. It was reported that all of them died from convulsions of some sort. It was thought that Palmer used to poison them by dipping his finger in sugar and then coating some poison on his finger, letting the babies lick his finger. That's just evil. At certain times, Palmer had commented to certain people how expensive bringing up a family is. William Palmer survived until the year 1926. Ann THornton was worried about the reputation that the family were getting because obviously the 4 babies and Blayden had all died in their house. It was around this time that Palmer began to obtain money by insurance fraud. Palmer then sought to insure his wife Ann's life, and he was turned down by lots and lots of insurance companies. However, one did insure his wife's life for the sum of £13,000. Now, what do you think Ann's future held at this point? Not a lot, I think, is the answer. Now, his wife Ann attended a concert in Liverpool in September 1854, and she began feeling unwell, and upon return home, Palmer started to look after her. Despite the efforts of Dr Bamford, who, if you remember, Palmer called upon before to attend Blayden, after a few days, Palmer's wife Ann died. Now, Dr Bamford certified the cause of death to be English cholera. And guess what? The insurance company reluctantly paid William Palmer the sum of £13,000. At around about the time of Ann Palmer's death, Palmer had an affair with his housemaid, Eliza Tharme, and 9 months later they had a child together. However, at just the age of 6 months, this child died on the 13th of December 1855. So at this time in 1854, Palmer was heavily in debt. Now, William Palmer's mother was quite wealthy, and so he decided that he would basically forge her signature on cheques to pay some of his debts. He also took out loans in his mother's name. When he started falling behind on his payments, these creditors threatened to speak to his mother, who they thought owed them the money, but then that would expose his fraud. Now, William's mother was well aware of what William was doing to get money fraudulently. However, William was her favourite child, and she found it too severe to expose what he was doing. Now, Palmer's main moneylender was a Mr Pratt who lived in London. Palmer owed Mr Pratt a lot of money at the time. So it's here that Palmer attempted another insurance swindle and basically looked at insuring his brother Walter on a life insurance policy to the sum of around £82,000. Now, Walter was an alcoholic and at the time was living off a private income to his wife of around £450 per annum. Now, in an effort to talk Walter into having this life insurance, Dr Palmer offered him a large sum of money in return. Now, Dr Palmer approached 6 companies to try and get this life insurance. Now, looking at the doctor's report into Walter, none of these companies would insure Walter. However, an insurance policy was finally obtained for a much smaller amount than £82,000. Now, of course, William started treating Walter as soon as he could, and he was seen purchasing prussic acid in Stafford and making a mixture up in the Junction Hotel. Walter's health suddenly took a turn for the worse. Walter died soon after this, and Dr Palmer hastily buried Walter in the family vault at Rugeley. Now, other members of Dr Palmer's family that died in suspicious circumstances are actually in the vault. I have visited this vault, and you'll see that visit later on in the video. Now, the insurance company became very suspicious of the cause of Walter's death and refused to pay any money out on the insurance policy. And let's face it, who can blame them? Palmer had previously attempted to convince 2 other men to take life insurance, a George Bate and Tom Myatt. Myatt claimed that Palmer tried to poison him by lacing his drink, and through inquiries the insurance company found out about this also, and that also influenced their decision not to provide Walter Palmer with life insurance. Now, at this time, Palmer was under massive pressure to pay his debts back, and he had been seeing a woman by the name of Jane Burgen, who was the daughter of a local policeman. Jane became pregnant during their affair. She then blackmailed Palmer using letters that Palmer had written to her, and if he didn't pay the money, she was going to tell her father. It was at this point that Palmer embarked on his final attempt to get money to pay off his debts. John Parsons Cook was an ex-solicitor from Lutterworth and also had a hobby of horse racing. They attended race meetings together and, at the time, were good friends. Cook owned a horse by the name of Polestar, which won the Shrewsbury Handicap and won Cook the sum of £1,700. That night, Cook and Palmer celebrated in the Raven Hotel where they were staying, and the next day attended the races again. The following night, Palmer and Cook were seen drinking, and Palmer was seen paying particular attention to a tumbler of liquid which Cook was drinking from. And Cook, you guessed it, became very sick after this drinking bout with Palmer. So although Cook became ill, he returned with Palmer to Rugeley, where he stayed at the Talbot Arms Hotel, which is opposite Palmer's house. The following morning, Cook became violently ill, and Palmer sent food and soup over to him from his house. Now, at this time, Palmer asked Dr Bamford, who I mentioned earlier in the video, to administer some medication to Cook, maybe again to divert any suspicions from Palmer. A chambermaid who worked for Palmer sampled some of this soup as she took it over to Cook, and she became violently ill too. So Palmer had to make a trip to London at this time, and he sent for a Mr Jones, who was a friend of Cook, to stay by Cook's side whilst Palmer went to London. Upon Palmer's return, he was witnessed purchasing strychnine and prussic acid. He then asked Dr Bamford for his assistance in making up tablets to give to Cook. He gave these tablets to Cook, along with some dark coloured liquid. Cook's friend, Mr Jones, was sleeping in the same room as Cook to keep an eye on him through the night. Now, after Cook gave him the pills that he and Dr Bamford made up for him, Jones woke in the middle of the night to find Cook in great pain. Of course, Dr Palmer was sent for and gave Cook more pills. This caused Cook great pain. He was convulsing, he was twisting his body up in agony, his body was becoming rigid, and he died. Palmer quickly laid out the body, maybe getting rid of any incriminating evidence. Cook's stepfather, a Mr Stevens, came to Rugeley upon hearing of Cook's death. He found the circumstances of Cook's death to be very suspicious, and Mr Stevens couldn't find certain documents that Cook had been in possession of at the time of his death. Palmer asked Dr Bamford to sign Cook's death certificate, and the cause of death was stated as apoplexy. Now, apoplexy is basically another word for a stroke. A post-mortem on Cook was carried out at the Talbot Hotel. His intestines and stomach were removed, but no signs of any poison were found, including strychnine or any acids. These organs were then placed into jars, which Palmer attempted to tip over. I guess he was afraid that something would be found upon further examination. The jars containing Cook's innards were then sent to London, and Palmer attempted to bribe the taxi driver that took these jars the sum of £10 to break the jars, but the taxi driver refused to do this. Now, Cook bribed a postmaster by the name of Mr Cheshire to intercept a letter from London which contained the results of the tests on Cook's organs. The postmaster accepted the bribe, and the results were all negative. There were no traces of any poisons, which Palmer obviously was delighted by. Palmer then tried to bribe the coroner to say that Cook died of natural causes, but the coroner had other suspicions, didn't take the bribe, and recorded the death of Cook as willful murder. Palmer was then arrested for the murder of John Parsons Cook. Shortly after Palmer's arrest, the bodies of Ann Palmer and Walter Palmer were exhumed from the family vault, and post-mortems were carried out on them. The autopsy on Walter proved to be inconclusive. However, the autopsy on Ann Palmer revealed that she had been poisoned. Dr. Palmer's trial took place in London, where he was found guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to death by hanging. Now, it's worth remembering here that he was only found guilty on one count of murder, and that was to John Parsons Cook. Palmer never admitted guilt throughout the whole trial. He was transferred up to Stafford jail. At 8 o'clock on the morning of June the 14th, 1856, Palmer was stood at the gallows with his hangman, a George Smith. He shook hands with George Smith and was reported to have said, "God bless you." Palmer then went to his death. Controversy has surrounded Palmer's trial, obviously due to his reputation he had up in Rugeley, with so many people dying around him, seemingly of being poisoned. It could be argued that the jury were influenced by this. Remember, no poison of any kind was found in the organs of John Parsons Cook, so effectively Dr. Palmer was convicted on circumstantial evidence. Palmer was buried without a coffin at Stafford jail, and it's reported that he's buried underneath the window on the right. Now, I haven't been to Stafford jail, so I don't know whether his grave is marked in any way, and I couldn't find out during my research. This is St Augustine's Church in Rugeley, where John Parsons Cook is buried, and is also the location of the Palmer family vault. This is the grave of John Parsons Cook, who was the last victim of Dr. William Palmer's murderous streak. The writing on the grave is hard to distinguish these days. There is writing inscribed around the sides of the grave too. Again, this is hard to distinguish. I did, however, manage to locate this print that shows what is inscribed on the grave. This is the Palmer family vault, where Dr. Palmer's wife Anne, his brother Walter, and all of their children are buried. The exact number of Palmer's victims may never be known,
but may they all rest in peace.
So there you have it, the story of the Rugeley Poisoner, or as he was otherwise known, the Prince of Poisoners. Let me know in the comments what you think about this case, whether you think that justice was done, convicting Palmer to death on circumstantial evidence. Let me know your thoughts. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.